Um, we got a lot to go through, and so I'm just going to hand it right over to Bill, and we're going to go into this detailed conversation to really kind of establish where we are right now. So take it away, Bill.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to pull up the agenda real quick and just kind of run through that with you all. And then we'll jump into the individual parts. And Michael is right. I think we have a lot to go through today. Um, we're going to review the schedule, but I might want to push that down into the conversation at number 6 around community outreach and stakeholdering. So I just think it'll flow better with that because that's where we're going to talk about trying to get these public hearings on our schedules and lock them in. I'm going to do a technical committee update. Michael from Fair and Pierce is here instead of Jason. Jason's out on some family matters. Then we will go to Polly to go through the IGA. We'll update you on our meetings that we've had with CDOT and our neighboring jurisdictions. Those have been going along well. I have I'll walk through a spreadsheet I've created on funding estimates. Then we'll talk about community outreach, next meeting date, and adjourn. So without further ado, I'm going to switch my screen. And while I'm switching my screen to a document that we want to go through from the technical side, um, just holler if there's any questions or anything not on that agenda that we wanted to tackle. So let me get this document pulled up. For some reason, my computer is not showing it. So I'm apologies. Hold on one second.
For those of you that are just jumping on, we just kind of went through the agenda and we're just getting started with the technical committee update number 2.
Yep. So we recently held our first technical committee meeting. Thank you to all the folks who joined that meeting. It was primarily led by Jason from Fair and Peers. He went through kind of a history of the transportation planning, their work, the report that they put together with that group, and then we discussed what the goals and what we're need to accomplish as the technical committee. Now, I think the technical committee's work is going to be a little more stretched out because some of that work's going to come from the work Fair and Pierce is going to be working on. And Michael, please jump in if you want to give any updates on kind of the going forward work from Fair and Pierce. But we're really going to jump in the Fair and Pierce team and start to update numbers and cost estimates for these different services that have been contemplated as part of the RTA process. So, and then as we start to get those, we will be working with the technical committee folks to review those and help understand where we might prioritize, given what revenue might be available as well toward the RTA. We're going to have to kind of balance all those and bring those numbers to you all after we've discussed them and vetted them. Of course, formation committee members are always welcome to join those meetings, participate, and then we'll always bring back to the next formation committee meeting an update. What I wanted to share today with you all is a document that the Fair and Peers team and myself worked on. This is not new territory for you all, but after meeting with the technical committee, we decided to keep working forward on broad service goals. And so these are in no particular order, or they could be in a particular order if we wanted to prioritize them. But on your screen, You can see service goal 1, increase number and frequency of buses on Highway 40 between Craig and Steamboat. That the RTA would take over operations of the regional route, but the Steamboat Springs Transit would continue to operate their routes and services within the city. Goal number 2 is a circulator bus within Craig that would serve both as a local transportation option and a connector, so more a first last mile connector with the Highway 40 bus. Service goal number 3, provide new bus routes to unserved areas such as South Route County. And maybe that's not just bus routes, maybe there's van share or other alternative ways to do that. Service goal 4, new transportation options to the airport for employees and visitors. Going in, from Craig to the airport, from the Steamboat Springs area to the airport. Service goal 5, improve existing bus stops along the 40 corridor and develop new bus stops for unserved and new corridors. Service goal 6, create park and ride lots for commuters to access the bus routes. Goal 7, support roadway safety improvements such as crosswalks, pedestrian improvements, adjacent to bus stops. This could also include wildlife crossings if that's something that we want to consider. There's all kinds of safety improvements, and that the RTA would be a part of planning, coordination, and possible financial support to those safety improvements. And goal number 8 would be to be a stakeholder in the regional and commuter rail. I've gotten some edits to the language on that to strengthen that language, and we'll get that updated. Finally, for the formation committee, I think it's important to have a conversation today. The Fair and Pierce team would like to get feedback. Are these the goals we want to still pursue? Do we want to prioritize them? And then we eventually have to, for example, with service goal number 1, we've got to then also start to define what is the level of service that we aspire to. Is it more peak, peak service, more frequency and off-peak? So those are all things we need to consider so we can start better budgeting and putting together some financial models for the service. Another thing I will say, I joined the Steamboat Springs City Council meeting last night to listen in, but then I also had the opportunity to introduce myself to the council. A question came up around, are we going to consider fare free service? So I think that's another thing that we have to at least put into our thinking and direction so that we can model for that as well. So I'm going to pause there and see if Michael, please jump in from the Fair and Pierce side, and then anyone else. What are our thoughts on this? Are we in the right direction? Are we missing anything? And let's go from there. And then Michael, jump in, Michael, please.
Hey everyone, Michael Cameron. I know I haven't been on these meetings previously, but I know many of you from our previous efforts with the formation of the RTA, specifically for the transportation planning elements that we finished up last year. So good to see a lot of familiar faces, good to meet the new ones, to me that is. And one thing as I'm looking at this that I wanted to bring up is as it relates to the goal number 3, so providing new bus routes to unserved areas such as Route County, such as South Route County. Something that I was looking back at some of our materials from the executive summary of the previous study is service to Steamboat 2. And wanting to understand if that is something that we specifically also wanted to call out, and apologies if that's been discussed previously, but wanted to see if we wanted to be more explicit about that in that service goal about providing, the new bus routes to unserved areas. I know that's something we had contemplated with the previous effort.
Yeah, Michael, thank you for bringing that up. We definitely want to include anything outside of the city of Steamboat Springs. So Steamboat 2, Heritage Park, the new school that's out there, and just some, going up, maybe up a little bit outside of Steamboat where we have the populace in there. Mainly where the kids need to be served and get to and from. So thank you for bringing that up. And then also Stagecoach, right? We say South Route. We know we have the two communities, but really the one of the large communities that are growing is the Stagecoach Lake. And so we really need to have that as part of the service development plan. Can anybody else here on the call, is there something that screams out that you're missing on this list, or things that you want a little bit more detail that we can talk about for a few minutes here?
Yeah, and I see Sonia has her hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask about this document. Is this like an internal document, or is this something that would be language that we would use externally, first of all?
Great question. Right now, Sonia, it's an internal working document for us, for the formation committee, for staff, for the technical committee folks. However, if we can get, and maybe Polly, you jump in, as part of the IGA and as part of getting the IGA in enough of a place where we can have these public hearings that are required under the statute, so we can then share the IGA with CDOT. We probably do want to have some placeholder of a service goal section. And so maybe something like this would find its way into the IGA so we can keep that process moving. But it does not mean that's the final service goals for the IGA.
Okay, well, I mean, I did have a couple of thoughts on this. One is that, yeah, we would very much like, as we've said all along, to make sure that wildlife crossings are specifically included explicitly. And then also, thanks, Michael, for bringing up that Steamboat 2 Heritage Park. I mean, as we get to what are flagship programs that immediately solve problems today, and also who's going to carry the water to the voters. I see that as a really big play because those folks have been working hard on that for a very long time. And obviously, Routt County has just submitted yet another grant for this. We're going to get it done regardless, one way or another. So why not tie something popular to the IGA and, and the RTA and get more voters engaged. So I'd love to see that particular situation. We're calling it the Safe Crossings Project. And, as we get to more public facing conversations, we can say things like, neighborhood driven safety improvements, such as, this kind of thing, or however we want to frame that. But I think it's really important to start building into our lexicon here that we are responding to the voters already with these kinds of programs. And so, please invest in this so we can do more of that. A couple other thoughts on this is, obviously this is all very bus focused within our language. And I'm thinking longer term, are we talking autonomous vehicles into the future? What? So if we can sort of talk about, multimodal and transit and multiple options and whatever, or at least be thinking about that, I think that would be helpful to me because it doesn't limit us. And then, the other thing that's been on my mind a long time, and even more so now that I'm at the county, is just our recreational pressures and problems. So do we want to include anything within this RTA about, and I'm thinking think about Hanging Lake, right? When they had to go to all transit shuttle vehicles. I think about what's going on up at North Route with the recreational pressures and the fact that we're never actually going to improve 129 because it's practically impossible. So is there going to be a time where we're going to be looking at transit focused recreational as a requirement, whether that's Strawberry Park, North Route, Fish Creek Falls has already been under discussion for that kind of program. So that's just a question to throw out there. And then the last question is just, North Route, I've forgotten where we are, but it hasn't been specifically mentioned. So do we think we're not going to do anything up there? I can't remember that discussion. So that's like a legit, just a,
No, I think it very much so. It hasn't come up in much. I know the Fair and Piers report didn't mention it. I think a lot of what we have to consider with North Route is that most everyone owns a vehicle and it's very sparse populace. As opposed to a urban growth boundary area like Oak Creek and Yampa and Stagecoach are more desirable because that's where a cluster of homes are. So I'm not opposed to going in that direction and having that in there. I don't want to let that derail, you know, the IGA, but if you think we need a paragraph or something in there that opens up the door to some future use of multimodal, then we would, you know, lean on the attorneys to kind of add that in.
thanks, Michael. That's helpful. I think the only, reason, I don't want to say reason, but the only legitimate argument to be made about that based on the fact that there isn't that much population is if we were to be focusing on some of the recreational pressure and transportation related to that. But, that's nothing that we've really discussed in any great detail. And who knows if at this stage in the game, it's even worth talking about, but just a flag out there.
Well, you got to think about what happens if 4th of July is still up at Steamboat Lake and we can get some buses, part of the RTA, to do a special event at one time for people to get out of Steamboat up there to watch the, not have other cars come back. So, if that was to happen due to recreation or visitors in that sense, we would want to look at that, but clearly not part of the regional transportation. Main focus is just the buses on the streets to get people back and forth. But I think we should include it somewhere in there. I don't object.
I thought it might be useful to respond kind of more generally to your points, Sonia. One, we have two pieces in the IGA, and one is kind of general powers, which are in our section 6. And so they contemplate regional transportation planning, generally transportation demand management. This is where the federal and local coordination, you act as that liaison. First last mile solutions is one we had talked about, contract transit services with Steamboat. Anyhow, there's kind of that laundry list of general powers and objectives of the authority. And it seems to me that kind of these future elements are ones that when we get to the IGA, I'll take a look for our next draft, but these kind of planning and anticipation of future issues belong in this section 6 of the IGA. So I would put, future transportation planning, transportation for recreational purposes. North Route, it sounds like something you want to have something more tangible immediately. And that the document that Bill has on the screen right now, we've used as what we call our Appendix C, which are authorized transportation projects. And they'll be the kind of immediate items for funding and voting. They can be amended as part of the amendment process of the IGA, the way we're structured right now, over time to address the bigger picture goals that are part of 6 as you move along as an RTA. So I think the service goals would probably be the place to put wildlife crossings. I understand that's kind of a more immediate project. Your safe crossings project I'd probably put in this Appendix C, as well as the Northern Route items you were just discussing. Is that kind of where you would see these falling out? I guess that's a question partially for Michael and for Bill.
It seems like a very easy, broad place to put it because we really don't know what the future holds, but at least it's written in there somewhere.
Yeah. So anything we want to be kind of immediate tasks, immediate funding, we should be putting in Appendix C for this document that Bill has on the screen. Longer term, big picture objectives we put in section 6.
So on that note, again, I know, I think, Sarah, you had your hand up for a minute, but of these service goals that are seeing outlined, is there anything, again, bring it up. We gotta move on to a little bit, but I wanted to talk about what we were going through with the technical committee. Are there any areas here that we need to be more detailed on or add to?
Michael, this is Randy from City of Craig. My question on, and Peter had mentioned it in the chat, but I was going to bring it up anyway. On the circulator bus, the city is already working with Steamboat Transit and has been on improving the stops that we have right now. Are, with the circulator, new improved stops with covered bus stops type thing going to be part of that circulator and paid for by the RTA? Or is this something that the city is going to have to continue to work on its own?
Well, I would say that it's anything that the fact that the city of Steamboat Springs is going to relinquish the regional portion allows outside of the city limits to be run anything by the RTA. Then if you want your own circulator, there may be an additional cost. We've talked about that. It may be part of the same cost. I don't really know how that's gonna hammer out.
Right.
But, you know, Hayden, Oak Creek, you guys, if you want a separate circulator route, it's gonna be, you know, defined on that. Now, with that being said, I think still working with Jonathan Flint and Steamboat, because we have people that understand the demographic that we're working with, and you know the location. So we want to maintain that. I don't know where that falls into this service development plan and Fair and Piers. Maybe Michael, you can speak on, is that stuff being developed in this process?
Well, one thing I'm just going to jump in on Randy's question and Peter's note in the chat about bus stops is that, I mean, it's going to be a resource allocation issue, right? That the RTA board ultimately will be in charge of, right? So if the ballot question is successful, and the RTA is formed and it has funding attached to it from whatever sources are approved and accessible, then it's a resource allocation. So the RTA may be able to help build bus stops in Craig, but honestly, given probably what the resources are going to be available, they can't build them all right away, right? So then the RTA would maybe partner with the city or phase in bus stops, but those are things that the RTA board would ultimately probably be the decider on in the future.
Yeah, that helps. I just
Yeah.
wasn't sure if detailed wise if that was something that was part of this as part of the circulator, or if it was future RTA stuff.
Yeah, because Michael from Fair and Piers, how detailed do you get on even just like bus stops and the costs and stuff like that in your modeling?
If I remember correctly, we had done some pretty detailed estimation. I mean, not going all the way to design of these if we were to implement new bus stops, but just generally speaking, like how many bus stops and generally where they would be. I think that was included, if I remember correctly, in our modeling. But one thing that maybe I'll point out is that, you know, in service goal 2, we are specifically saying that the RTA would be wanting to establish this new circulator bus route. So to me, the way that that's written is that that there's a and any supporting elements that directly support RTA service goals are within kind of the RTA's purview. Now, that is up to you all to determine what is the best way to do that. I will say that just from my work down in the Gunnison Valley, where they are, where there's the 1% sales tax across the entire district that funds Gunnison Valley, and that's taxed in Gunnison, unincorporated Gunnison, and Crescent Butte. But then Crescent Butte itself has its own transit system that they're taxing an additional 1% on. And so I think the thing that for us to be careful with in here is just the way that this politically plays out. If we are funding Steamboat transit with the current funding sources and then adding an RTA tax, but using that to fund some of Craig's or Hayden's or any of the other municipalities' local transit, that may get a little bit politically more challenging, or things that you may just get more questions about, well, why does Steamboat have to pay more for its transit when you know, Craig or Hayden or Oak Creek or Yampa, whoever gets that. So that and maybe I'm not being very clear, but the point is that in previous experience, I have seen that play out, where it's a little bit of a question of, well, why does one jurisdiction get the RTA funding and gets to work with that versus the other jurisdiction is not doing that. So, and that's all up to us. And I know that there's also some legal elements to that too. Polly, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I was going to just touch on that very quickly. So we have what we say in our current draft of the IGA is that the authority can provide services that operate solely within the boundaries of a single member. But unless it's specifically provided that the RTA is going to pay for it, then that can only happen pursuant to an agreement with the RTA that where the locality covers the cost of the services. And that's the way we've kind of talked about a lot of these services that would serve just a specific member. So, which isn't to say we can't fund it, all of those improvements as an RTA, but they have to be called out specifically, as you pointed out in the service goals or the agreement.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, thank you, Sonia. We will look at the prioritization of this later on. We just wanted to let you guys know here what the technical committee meeting and what they'll be focusing on, and you guys are now in the know. Just make note of that at the bottom of that when we're talking that there's some detail that we're going to want for the public, but not necessarily in the IGA. So that's going to be a little bit more broad and not as specific.
Michael,
Yeah, keep going. Any other questions on the technical committee, Sonia?
Yeah, one thing that Polly's comments just made me want to ask about is service goal 8 related to rail. You know, I think we've had discussions off and on about what's most strategic and what's not strategic relating RTA and rail together. But I will say that, you know, looking at what the CTE is going to do to deploy the resources that we want from the state for rail, we're going to need to have some matching funds. So does service goal 8 allow for the funding of rail as a matching fund type of thing, or does it allow for the funding at all? Or is that not the place for it? Because I mean, my primary objective of all of this high level is just to make sure that whatever we think we might want to do into the future, we don't preclude it with language that cuts us off. I mean, we saw how that worked with the Trails Alliance proposal, Michael B. And we don't want to do it again. So I'm very focused on making sure that we leave the door open for rail, even though it is a non-specific point at this time. So does that satisfy that? Or is that going to be addressed through the IGA?
So a couple of thoughts. One is if you wanted to be in a position to operate or to use some of your funds for matching purposes explicitly out of the initial approvals, I would probably include that opportunity to match or provide matching funds as part of your service goals. We do have a stakeholder, and I'm just checking to see what language we retained on rail. But then in general, I think you want to have some language related to support for rail and in the document, I'm sorry, the main body of the IGA.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Well, I think we definitely need to address that. It's not the elephant in the room, but we don't want to limit us to having to go back and amend it. If we can keep it somewhat broad and located in the Appendix C, that would.
And your point is well taken, which is we can always amend. Yeah. It's hard to amend, but you can amend.
Okay.
Okay. We do need to keep moving on.
Matthew has his hand up. Michael.
Yeah.
Sorry. Matthew?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see Matthew. Matthew Mendisco.
Thank you, everybody. I think generally speaking, to Sonia's point, if there is a method of which we can include every, just in general broad language, my experience is if in general broad language within the IGA, what is allowable under statute for the RTA. But specifically excluding hard stops like air and stuff we know we're not going to do. I would think that that would broadly give us enough power, broadly being the board, that they would be able to then include those things, or potentially consider them at some point. If they have to be service goals, if we have to say them in the service goals, then I think we need, it feels like there's a lot in here that people may go, why am I paying for this or that when this is supposed to just be getting me from point A to point B? So, if that could be achieved, to Michael's point, then I think, as long as we can do that broadly speaking, I don't see how it would exclude those things in the future. So we can move on. We would be in favor of broad language, including services that can be done by an RTA in the future, and not specifically excluding them. If that has to be done in the service goal, then obviously some more refinement needs to be had, but rail is part of an RTA allowable service. So generally speaking, I think as long as we include it, it doesn't preclude us from doing matching funds versus actual rail versus whatever, if it's a general broad power of the RTA.
Okay.
Okay, good discussion. All right, folks, we're gonna move on to the IGA review.
So I would like to do the IGA review in two parts. And actually, Bill, before we move on, or Michael, before we move on to the IGA review, do you want to talk about funding materials that Bill circulated also?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you want to jump to the tax assumptions?
Yeah, I mean, I
Might
guess
as well-
those were
Sure.
those were the two pieces we were going to talk about with IGA also.
Sure, I'll
so-
bring that up.
That might be good to then we can move to what we want to say, or that tells us what we want to say in the IGA as well.
Leads into more detail, gotcha.
Yep. I mean, funding is kind of one of the elephants in the room, so might as well talk. It came up last night, obviously, as well at Steamboat Springs City Council. So you all have this document. I'm going to just run through it real quick, but then turn it back to Polly to lead the conversation. This is a document I put together with the assistance of finance directors, with our larger jurisdictions and reviewing budgets for Oak Creek and Yampa. But I feel pretty solid about these numbers up on the screen for you all as a starting point to see with the allowable funding sources under the RTA statute. It doesn't mean that we're not looking at any other funding source that could be out there. But as far as sales tax, property tax, vehicle registration fees, and accommodation tax, these are what's generally allowed under the RTA statute. The sales tax data right now is 2024. If we had a half penny sales tax in 2024, it would have generated about $6.5 million toward the RTA. So you can see that a full penny would be closer to 13 million. One thing very important to note that the RTA cannot levy a sales tax on groceries, utilities, and other items exempt when the state collects the sales tax, because they are our fiscal agent, for lack of a better term, for collecting a sales tax. So this number is a little lower than what was in the Fair and Peers report previously, There's a possibility that that report included some of the grocery and utility sales tax. So I feel this is a stronger number to work from. Property tax, which I know is not really under consideration, but you can see some different levels there with property tax. Accommodation tax is allowed, but that's a very de minimis source of revenue, I believe, for us there, but it's still allowed. And you can, as an RTA, mix and match funding. It's confusing to voters. So I will say that I'm not sure I would, think that's a great idea, but you are able to mix and match, have different levels of sales tax. But I'm going to leave it there and Polly jump back in or any other members of the committee.
Bill?
One quick question, Bill. I don't know if we have this, but have we matched some of these to current pricing for some of the service goal menu items?
No, that's the work that Fair and Peers is really going to dig into. And Michael from Fair and Peers, if you just kind of want to jump in with any updates, but that's what he's going to embark on now, is to start, updating their estimates and matching that to these funding resources.
Yeah, Bill, I'll just add on to that. We have matched it to we've done a few investment scenarios through our previous study. But as Bill had mentioned, some of the service goals have changed since then, and as well as some of the estimates on some of this of what the revenue could potentially be has also changed. So, and as well as last time that we were doing this, we were doing a broad just like different scenarios of how we could collect different funding. So we were doing, what if it's 0.5 here, but then it's 0.25 in other, jurisdictions. So we were doing all that stuff. And as we get closer and narrow down to what we more legitimately think is going to be a real funding source, we will nail down more so on what those service goals and what the projects actually, how those match up. One other thing that I'll note that I've been investigating this week is that our original estimates didn't account for a lot of the administrative stuff, such as, paying the executive director and some of the staff and any of the marketing and IT and just some of that overhead. And so I've been researching how other RTAs budget for that. And so I'll be incorporating that into some of these cost estimates as well.
Yep. Yeah, very important that we need to start planning for administrative and operational cost of the RTA itself. We're going to have staff, benefits, healthcare, retirement, all those kind of things to consider as well.
And I think the other point to make with respect to these funding sources is taxes have to go through the voter approval. Our fees and pledges and contributions do not.
So one thing that we talked about last night in city council was is really going to the voters and having this discussion. How do we fund this project? And so what we wanted to do is just kind of hear from everybody in the formation committee. Sonia and I have had some discussions. There was a discussion about a countywide sales tax versus just some other aspects of the city sales tax. And what does that look like? So I think we need to land a little bit looking at these numbers. Thank you very much, Bill. But I mean, Randy and Ryan, what are you guys thinking is palatable for your community? And how much detail, Polly, are you guys going to need from us to put in this IGA? Are we going to end up getting down to the dollar percentage for your IGA, or is it going to be just a reference?
So I think that the Matthew articulated the IG. So we'll have to have something that authorizes taxes, right? But other than that, the IGA, Matthew articulated it really well. The general approach we've taken with the IGA is to authorize anything that's allowed by statute, unless there are some hard stops that you absolutely don't want the future RTA to consider. So, I think that we'll, at the end of the day, have to propose some funding, looking at these numbers, that will have to go to the voters. And that'll have to be a hard decision. Other than that, our question is there anything here that you just wouldn't consider? And you don't want to have out there for either optics or other considerations that would otherwise be authorized under statute, right?
Yeah, we don't want to get the optics out there wrong.
So I'm confused because I had thought from our previous discussions, even prior to this formation committee, and then with this, that we'd pretty much ruled out property taxes totally. The rest of it we talked about, but not really. I thought my opinion was that we were just concentrating on sales taxes and trying to figure out how to make that work, that the rest of it was just a no-go.
I agree with you on that one, Randy. And yes, it was discussed that a property tax across the jurisdiction is, the district is probably not going to be feasible. But we just you keep seeing it so that it's in the discussion that here's an option no one wants to do. I think that, to me, and the reason why I asked that question, Polly, is that I'm not ready to answer any of these detailed questions until we start doing polling. So we need to be able to bridge the gap between what does our constituents actually want to do, which we'll find out this spring and summer, versus what do we need right now for the IGA moving forward.
Right. And I think that this is where I might defer to some of Bill's advice. But, you know, we need, I'm going to call this IGA something that you're comfortable enough to put out for public comment and refine through polling in your public hearings. So I think that, you know, you're going to have, you'll want to put in as broad a scope of funding as you can into this draft of the IGA without, I guess, creating, you know, some sort of public outcry or furor. So we know we're going to refine what we put in, and I think our rules would be to put in the broadest sources of funding that you think you want to have out in public. And then you refine that through the public hearing process and through the polling.
And that really lends to Randy. Randy, do you think at this point, do we even need to keep it on there as an option? The property tax?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I again, I'm just one voice, but I think property tax is a no-go, period. And I think we see that and they see other options. I think it's going to confuse the public and get them mad.
Yes, I agree with Randy. I'm 100% on board with that. I think we dismissed property tax a long time ago. And the other reason, other than getting the public mad, I mean, one of the other things we talked about is that it would have to be uniform. And so it would kind of like preclude the opportunity to add others in, it would seem. Anyway, so many reasons I think we should get rid of it. The other thing is that the accommodations tax, I also thought was a no-go. I mean, you guys, Michael B. and the city of Steamboat Springs just loaded up a lot on your accommodations tax and short-term rental and all the things, and Routt County is probably going to do the same real soon. So that is not one that I think is in any way, shape, or form viable. I think, to me, the two that we haven't really talked about as far as like the details of them, and I think we're getting a little bit hung up about like, where does this fit? Is it IGA or is it whatever? But if we can conceptually agree that like sales tax is probably it, the resort contribution, I think, needs to be discussed, because, you know, here we got the city talking about, are you going to do a lift ticket tax? And how does that all play in with this? But it seems like those, to me, are the two most viable options. And also registration fee, I mean, seems viable, but it's not a big
Number.
It's not a big number. And then also when we look at what the state legislature is talking about doing, you know, there's been a lot of looking at different types of adjustments for registration fees related to weight of vehicles and emissions reduction and things like that. So, you know, I kind of look at that registration fee as something that everybody else also has their eye on. And do we really want to, you know, get into that situation? It looks like you also didn't include Moffett County as, so I'm assuming Moffett County administers the vehicle collection fee for Moffett County. So
yeah. The Moffett County, and they're not part of RTA, so, and Craig doesn't do it, so.
Yeah.
Right. And
so I don't see that one as a big winner, but I mean, you know, I think that's what we need to discuss high level is what are our sources? You know, to me, it's sales tax and and the pledge from the resort. And then from there on out, like, what do we have the appetite to think about putting forward? And you know, the resort one, that could take up the rest of this call, and I'm not sure we have the right people in the room for it either. But anyway, that's my 2 cents, is that we just kind of come up with our top line, like yes and no's, and hone down from there.
Hayden, what do you guys
I
think?
have. Hey, wait, sorry, this is Brian from Steamboat. Can
Oh,
I ask
go ahead,
one
Brian.
question? Does what's listed on here restrict our ability to do other things? For example, if we wanted to use a lift tax to pay for this and our transit, like, is what's listed here, those are Steamboat, like all of the members' only
These-
options for funding?
Right.
These are the only options the RTA is allowed to levy or ask voters for. An individual jurisdiction can find and then pledge funding from other sources. This is just what the RTA by statute is allowed to pursue as funding sources.
So if we decided we wanted to pledge a revenue source rather than have a sales tax in Steamboat, would that screw up the vote? Like, would that work or no?
You don't have to have uniform sales tax. And there were some pledges that, I mean, other RTAs have taken pledges of existing revenue streams.
One thing I think Brian is leaning toward is that we already have a 9% STR tax on our short-term rentals. And it was built into the ballot language that we could use that money for transportation. So we can allocate that money in future years moving forward. But again, that money's being earmarked for other affordable housing projects. So again, we as a city, we have decisions that we need to make. But that does open up the example of what we call pledging. And that's where we already have a funding source that we can then reallocate towards something new. And that's what Brian's bringing up, is that we don't have to put a sales tax for City of Steamboat Springs because we already have one in the accommodations tax. We just have to get the voters to approve that multi-year funding from the city.
Thanks, Michael.
Matthew?
Matt, I was going to ask you, what are you thinking? What comes across your mind when we have this conversation?
Well, I'm not, Ryan may want to speak up in terms of our town councils, but just from experience, my past experience at least, if we're going to go to the RTA as a whole for a vote, and they see, well, City of Steamboat people are not going to pay a sales tax, but Craig is, and Hayden is, because they don't have the accommodations tax and everything else that, you know, you're kind of discussing here. I get that in concept, but my experience would tell me that not only will that be confusing, people will just be angry that I'm paying something and others are not. Granted, people are coming into Steamboat and paying that accommodations tax, so I get that.
Mhm.
I really do. But having non-uniformity typically becomes very confusing for voters. And it also, now granted, City of Steamboat Springs by sheer population could carry the entire vote from a majority. And I wanted to ask that question, but it's a legal question. But it just seems to me, if you have a 1% sales tax, you have a 1% sales tax uniformly across the board. If the City of Steamboat chooses to allocate some of their additional money or whatever, if we have shortfalls or whatever, that would be up to them. I don't believe it precludes any jurisdiction for pledging additional funds to the RTA if they would choose to do so, but they don't have to. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I think a 1% sales tax in terms of just is what we have talked about in the past. And it seems the most palatable because people understand that it's not just us locally paying for it. And that's why it's always popular, is because people who fly into that airport every day every time they buy a sandwich, they're paying for our RTA. And, you know, or whomever, they stop at the gas station, they're paying for the RTA. They might not even care. They might not even look at it. Because at the end of the day, most people look at sales tax and they just don't register it. That's why it's so popular. So I'm
Matt,
in favor
a
of
follow-up. Oh, sorry.
And yeah, that was.
I just wanted to follow up on one thing you said in there, just so everyone knows. At the first vote of the RTA, the first ballot question will be by individual jurisdiction. So Steamboat voters will vote to put Steamboat into the RTA. Unincorporated Routt County voters will vote to put the county in. Hayden voters will put to votes. You get my example. And if there's a funding question as part of that ballot question, each entity will vote on their funding. Once the RTA is established, and then the RTA board decides in the future to put a funding question on the ballot, maybe that's a bond or a different tax. That would be a RTA-wide vote. That would be a 50% plus one majority vote for the entire RTA, which would then mean that one community might be able to carry the entire vote, possibly, in the future. Just wanted to make that distinction.
So my only follow-up question then would be, if Steamboat votes yes, but Hayden votes no, then I would assume the RTA would say, possibly, I know RTAs can have extraterritorial service, but still, I'm assuming that at that point, the RTA would say, geez, Hayden, you're not paying your fair share. Therefore, unless you can come up with funds yourself, city, the service doesn't go to you. And
It's possible.
yeah. I mean, I think it's right. It's only fair, right? So
I mean, it's happening in Eagle Valley with the fact that Gypsum did not vote to enter the Eagle Valley Transportation Authority. So and now they're trying to figure out how do they run another ballot question to try and get in because they're left out.
thank you for the answer.
Michael, you had your hand up briefly?
It was going to be exactly what Bill just said. We do have precedent in the state with core transit is what they're now called, but yeah, Eagle Valley.
Okay, so to keep the conversation moving along about updated funding estimates, is there any more information, Polly, that you guys are needing from us? You're hearing the conversation. I really think we're not going to handle a lot until we start getting into some of the polling, which will be in the spring, because I really want to hear what my constituents is palatable for. I can make the assumption and make the call as a leader of our community, but I'm being disingenuous to the whole populace until we start getting some polling done. So we're really going to start leaning on a lot of the polling and the outreach that we start. So we need to kind of have this in two phases. What taxing mechanisms do we need from the IGA perspective? And I don't know if this is enough, but we'd like to kind of make sure that you have what you need to get the RGA going.
So we could, I think kind of going back to the initial premise, you know, there are 5 different sources of funding that we can use. We could use any one of these types of funding. And what I'm hearing is that there is not much interest in 2 of them. And not much interest in having those even in the IGA for further consideration. And those would be property tax and vehicle registration fees, potentially. So for purposes of the IGA, we have not included, I think we've not included property tax, I'll just confirm. But I might in the next draft then just take out vehicle registration fees if there's some consensus around doing that. And leave everything else in as a potential funding source.
So
Right.
Polly, I think the 2 no's were lodging and property.
Right.
Yes.
And vehicle registration,
Oh.
I'm just flagging that it, you know, it has its set of challenges, but I don't know that we need to take it off the table necessarily.
Okay. And is there some consensus then also to take lodging off?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
I think I heard that.
all right.
And I'm just jumping for 1 second. Having served as town attorney in a mountain town, I do think, just to reinforce what you all are sensing, that sales tax is likely the most optimistic ballot measure for the RTA, at least for the next ballot. I also would say that while the sources of revenue that we had up on the screen that are enumerated in the statute are the ones likely available, there are also sources of revenue that you could impose through fares, tolls, fees. And I do think it's worth maybe a little bit more exploration of fees, given those are not a requirement to go to the ballot. And we've seen each year at the General Assembly, we see the expansion of the use of the fee. I don't have any idea in mind of what that might look like, but it is worth a little bit more homework there, I think.
Yeah, I think to put a finer point on it, those would be revenue generated in exchange for service.
Yeah, fee for service type approach. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
other piece that we just need to keep remembering, and one of the reasons that I am, you know, focused on lodging not being viable is just that the city's already put a pretty significant short-term rental tax that can be used. So, you know, again, making sure that everything that we have here is permissive. And I mean, I don't think there's any place in which we're precluding the opportunity for other funding sources to be utilized. But I just want to make sure that that's explicit and somewhere included. And I do like the idea of a fee for service, you know, being included as something to look at as an option. And vehicle registration, I mean, we can leave it on the table, but it does create some, you know, fairness questions and other types of things.
Yeah, my concern with the vehicle registration is basically you're looking at Routt County. You're not, I mean, Craig wouldn't be part of it. You're not going to get any money from us off of it. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And fee for service is what you see a lot in these other RTAs, but I also would not rule out whether there's other sort of fees that could cover capital improvements or, you know, I don't know what that might look like, but something to consider.
Yeah.
I mean, RTD has a sales tax and then there's a fee for service when you arrive at the bus stop. So, I mean, that's the largest transportation authority in the state, right? So, I mean, it's fairly common to have the capability. And I think the point being, like, we don't want to exclude it from the IGA as not having the power to do so. To my point about including everything you can in generality with the IGA, but excluding the hard stops like property taxes.
Great. So I'm hearing 2 hard stops and keeping all other options open in our IGA right now. Hard stops being property tax and accommodations tax. Logic.
I think that's what I've heard too. Okay.
Okay.
All right. We have 30 minutes left.
Yeah,
So,
let's go
and
through
Polly,
this
you need,
IGA.
you got some IGA stuff. So what do you need up on the screen?
So let's go ahead and put the red line of the IGA
Yeah,
up.
I'm sorry, one more thing before we move off of this. We have not established a mechanism by which we are going to discuss what the appropriate contribution of the resort is. And, you know, when that article came out in the paper where, you know, it was told to the public that we were accepting $1 million, I got a lot of feedback and none of it was good. So we're not going to resolve the issue today, but my question is, you know, what's the role of this group? What's the role of the city? What's the role of the resort? And how do we get that question? What's the programming to answer that question?
I wanted to from the legal perspective and incorporating that I guess decision or level, you know, we can you know, accommodate a dedicated pledge that is part of our IGA, that the resort could provide as an element and as a part of this agreement, even though it's not a member. We could include that pledge or agreement to provide a certain level of funding as an exhibit to this agreement. And I think that, or it could be something that the RTA, is certainly a power. The RTA can accept those pledges. My sense is that this is a issue and a pledge that you want to have nailed down as part of the formation of this entity. And so I would just say, from a legal perspective, we can put the pledge agreement in place as part of, the process and the overall agreement structure of the IGA.
Yeah.
And then the question is, how do you have the conversation, and who needs to be part of that?
Yeah, that's a much more detailed conversation that we aren't ready to have right now. We got to get through this IGA, but let's definitely make note of that. And I know Sarah's on the phone. She's listening to this, and we're going to have a deeper conversation later on.
All right. Let us know as the consultants how we can help, but we're probably going to have to follow your leads on this at this point.
And just to add to that, we are about to jump into negotiation with the city. They're asking us for funding specifically for transit. So happy to, I think where we are and where this comes from in terms of the pledge, where the funding source is, will probably be related to that negotiation. So I'm happy to, as we move forward with that negotiation, and I can't give you an answer now because we haven't started that negotiation, but we can provide more information as we get further along in that.
Okay, so the plan is Ski Corps and City talk. They come up with what is proposed and agreeable to them. And then this group thinks about that for the RTA. Is that the right plan then? Because I guess my question is, what I'm trying to get at is, my response to people who reacted to the article about $1 million was, this has not been decided, that there are discussions happening. And if that's our talking point, I think that's our talking point, is that, this is under negotiation between the city and the resort, and, the RTA formation committee will hear what they've proposed in the future. I mean, is that our talking point on that issue?
I think that's a great way to say it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
From my perspective.
Okay.
All right,
So,
let's
not
move on to
speaking
the
on this.
IGA. We need to get going on that. So thank you, Sonia, for bringing that up. Let's go ahead, Polly.
So, Michael, we have accomplished the meeting 2 objectives with the exception of 1. And we can, with the exception of 2. And this is, I want to raise it, this resort contribution just a little bit more pointedly, regardless of what the number and funding source of the contribution is it this group's sense that that contribution needs to be an element of this agreement? Specifically, in other words, do you want, as part of the approval of this agreement, a pledge that if the IGA is approved, the resort will contribute X?
Well, I think for me, I haven't talked to anybody at the ski resort on this, but what are they going to get for that? Is it just, is this goodwill pledge that they're going to give to the whole group, or they're not clearly going to get a seat at the table in essence? So I think it's going to be a little bit deeper conversation, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now.
Okay.
We have time to edit this and have a deeper conversation when it comes to Ski Corps' participation, whether it's funding or as a, side jurisdiction member, I don't know. But let's go through some of the other things.
Okay, so our topics for this meeting were to consider the proposed list of projects and systems the RTA will provide. That was essentially the service goals. And I think we have some revisions and tweaks to those service goals that we can roll out from that discussion. That becomes a version of our Appendix C to this agreement. And then we talked about proposed sources of revenue to the RTA. And what I'm hearing is we're keeping all of the sources of revenue, which are actually pretty fully listed in the current draft, except to property tax and lodging tax. So those were our two principles. And then the other was just to provide some feedback on the revisions that I made based on our last committee meeting. And I think if we could just, I guess there's two options. We can scroll through those and I can offer an explanation of those revisions and see if there's any comment, or has everybody, is that a waste of time and people just want to chime in because you've already reviewed? What's your sense?
Yeah, overall, you guys just need a consensus for those that are on the call. Have you gone through and read through this, or is this your first time through it? Would you like her to just to go through the bullet points? Raise your hand on the bullet points.
Yeah, and I apologize, I'm not getting, my view isn't showing everybody at the same time. So I'll rely on you, Michael, to tell me what the consensus is.
I'm not getting anything from anybody. What do you guys want to do? Do you want to go through this line by line for the next half hour? Do you guys have some things that you brought up?
Kevin and Randy have hands up. What does that indicate?
Oh, go ahead, Randy.
Just that I've read it through numerous times and I'd rather just do bullet points. I don't really want to take all the time to go through this detail by detail.
Me too.
Yeah. High
okay.
level. Polly, you tell me what page you want to be on.
So I'm going to ask a general question. Has everybody looked at these red lines and are you happy with them? Any additions or
I'll
corrections?
admit I haven't looked at them, Polly. Sorry, I looked at some of the other more recent email. I'll look at it right.
Okay, I can just skim through and this just give you a high. Let's just go red line to red line.
That's good.
And I'll just tell you what we've done. So first one, I had the wrong election date. Thank you, Dan Foote. That's been corrected. This was just an acknowledgement that we're happy with the Yampa Valley Transportation Authority. So I deleted the margin comment. There were, again, thanks to Dan, there were a few residual 8 member references. Those have all been changed back to 6. I think it was Sonia who suggested that we always refer to Steamboat Springs to distinguish the city from the resort. So all references to Steamboat Springs are now Steamboat Springs instead of Steamboat. We have, this is a question that I think we have to have, we may not be able to have Routt County run the election for Craig. So I'm just holding that as a placeholder, but we can cover what we've discussed with Moffat County separately.
Polly, can you elaborate on that, or would you like for me to ask our clerk? Do you feel pretty confident that that's the case?
If you ask your clerk, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll follow up with you guys.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That makes it simple.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
She'll say yes or no, and we'll delete the bullet or the comment.
I mean, oftentimes in a multi-jurisdictional election that crosses counties, typically one of the clerks is the primary election official. Maybe it can be worded that way.
We'll see. I know that Routt County can handle all of the local elections, obviously.
Right. Clearly.
So
Okay.
we'll confirm. And then just roll down to the next revision. We've got Steamboat Springs again. We have confirmed our boundary area that will include all of the municipalities in Routt County, the city of Craig, and the flagpole. So we can go to the next change.
Yeah, it's that this one in section B, right?
Oh, yes.
That's important.
We also confirmed that if some of our jurisdictions reject participation in the IGA will move forward so long as Steamboat Springs and Routt County approve.
Oh.
So that we've considered those are two essential participants. We have to have at least two, and as long as those two approve, we're golden. And if they do not, the IGA will fail.
So one more thing on the clerk question. I'll get a direct answer from her about Craig, but typically what happens in these cases is we have to have a shape file on the boundaries. So it adds time, you know, it's just because like we're creating a new district with a, I mean, there are two ways to do it. It's either every single jurisdiction has its own question, or we create a new district and there's a district-wide question that goes across the entire district. That makes sense?
Yes, and for this purpose, they're individual jurisdictions
Okay.
that vote these. So we shouldn't need any new taxing district or election.
Right. The question would just be more, would Moffat County
Administer
the Craig portion, or would they be comfortable with
Routt
administering the Craig portion?
For this election in the fall, typically Moffat County would handle our election for the city of Craig. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
All right.
So we'll have Sonia reach out to see if there's a way for Routt to take on everybody's question, but we'll just see how that answer plays out. Here I've just corrected the numbers of directors and participants from 8 to 6. What it means here is that a quorum will be 4 directors, and we'll have to have at least 4 of 6 directors for majority votes.
Yep.
And there's some votes that can be majority of the quorum, so that would be 3. This was a clarification about what we do if we can't meet the requirement of the statute that there be at least 5 directors. And that the question was, how would that happen? So I added some language, and I think this was again a clarification that came out of your comments, Sonia. So I made a clarification here that we might have fewer than 5 members because either not all of the members approved the original ballot questions to participate, or someone elects to withdraw. So this would be the circumstance where if that happened, everybody has 2 directors so that we meet our minimum of 5. And if we only had Routt and Steamboat Springs, they would each have 3.
Great.
Great.
Go ahead, Matt.
I think it's highly uncommon to have even numbered directors on board.
I think that's right, and we could.
4. I mean, I know the initial 5 thing from statute, but it would seem we would either have 5 or 7, although I guess if we're striving for 6, I'm assuming we're striving for 6 because that provides equal representation.
Yeah, we are, and then we define the number that have to approve. So 4 have to approve. So you can't have a tie of half and half.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
So that's how we handled it in the voting.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
This added the treasurer as one of the directors that has to be an officer of a member jurisdiction. This was a discussion point from the last meeting.
Okay. Keep going.
And then we made a few tweaks to, this is kind of the general powers and called out objectives. we had talked about the interplay between the service goals and section 6. This is section 6. So we deleted air service and focused specifically on coordination with CDOT with respect to mountain rail as being a role of this body of the RTA.
Perfect.
This is a reference to the wildlife corridors. This is the safe cross, I think we have safe roadway and transportation corridor crossings for wildlife. And this is just a support. It doesn't identify it here as something that is necessarily funded by the authority. That would go into our service goals if we intend to build those.
I have a question for our elected officials. How comfortable are you that the authority is mandated to support state and federal efforts to provide and maintain safe roadway and transportation corridor crossings for wildlife? Shall is a very strong word, and that leaves you almost zero space as a board to say, we don't think that's a good project.
Yeah, I think it's fine if it were to say may, but
Well, may is different than shall.
yeah, I
If the
think it would
authority
be fine for it to say may,
may
not shall.
support, you know, that may wouldn't have even brought up the question, but it's up to y'all. But I guess it is a thing that like you don't really get an option. Doesn't mean funding, and I get that, but like, what if it's an extremely unpopular thing? You would be possibly forced into supporting it anyway.
Yeah, and we could make it discretionary with may. We also could include a proviso that says something like, provided that there is no sacrifice of transportation safety or roadway safety, or provided it's in the best interests of the authority and its electorate.
You have a proviso, I think again, then it changes it, but as is right.
I think may is much better than,
There's-
I mean,
there's
it's just
ability-
empowering, enabling language is what we are always looking for, not. But it does concern me what I heard you say, Polly, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to fund it, and if it's not in the other piece. So I mean, again, more enabling and more commitments to funding is good for me on this topic. Thanks for flagging that, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I want the board to have as much power as possible, I guess is my point, but I don't want them to be bound legally to do it. I want them to have the ability to vote and to be democratic about it is my point, so.
Great. So what I'm hearing is some consensus around may.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please, definitely.
Okay, this next is a correction. This was originally drafted with the assumption that the authority would essentially take over Steamboat Springs Transit. And this just pairs that back to taking over the regional service and cooperation with the city of Steamboat Springs to transition those the infrastructure and requirements for taking over the regional service to the authority. This came out of some discussion about what would happen if some of the jurisdictions elect not to join the RTA, but want some level of service. This originally addressed only service to members that wasn't provided broadly across the authority. I expanded this language based on our conversation at the last meeting to be also the mechanism by which the authority could provide service to non-member jurisdictions. This allows them to enter into an agreement and essentially pay the authority for service. Here I took out, there was some BLM related language here that was inapplicable. And then we focused instead on first and last mile. If we page down to the next page, Bill. So this specific Yampa identified specific Yampa Valley trail systems with an emphasis on first last mile connectivity to transit access points. And this addressed another one of Sonia, your comments about just the landmines associated with trails and trails generally and needing to be a lot more specific. So hopefully this captured the conversation and your particular concerns about specificity.
I guess I'm still a little confused by it because it's, what are we transitioning? Like, what are we, it looks like you still can take over the operations, maintenance, capital improvements and funding required for trails. I guess transitioning is confusing to me. Does that mean that like now the authority will take over like maintenance of the core trail, or are we talking about?
I mean, that's what we have here. Do we need this to focus on construction, both the possibility of transitioning, and what I have here is a bracket for identifying the specific trails that you want to focus on, again, to address the comment, but talk a little bit more about intent here.
Well, I mean, I think the only reason that this is in here is because it was in the Eagle Valley Authority. We've never talked about anything related to this organization taking over maintenance of the core trail or anything like that. And I think the more that we, include something like this, the more we're going to be like looking at people in hate and going, why are we going to like, you kidding me? We're going to be monitoring Emerald Mountain trails or, whatever. I think this opens us up without giving any actual additive benefit. I mean, so I guess what I would say is if we're going to talk about, I mean, last mile connectivity to transit points doesn't really even, I mean, trails to me, we've never talked about including trails. So the only reason this is in here, as far as I'm concerned, is because we borrowed from Eagle Valley, and I think trails should completely be out of this.
Is there consensus for taking trails out entirely?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Okay, trails are gone.
Yeah, I mean, first last mile is great, but I think that that's more related to transit stops in my mind than it is necessarily trails.
Okay. Thank you. That's good.
Sonia, thank you.
Let's roll down to the next set of changes. This was just highlighting our potential or our authorized funding mechanisms. Actually, this comment may be more than we want to dive into today.
We did cover some of that earlier.
Yeah, I think what we were concerned about is what happens when you have some who fund and some that don't. And I think what would happen as we've drafted right now is that if you've elected not to fund but to be a member, we don't have an option. If you've elected not to fund and not to be a member, we have a provision that would allow the RTA to provide services by agreement, and for local services by agreement. But
we had talked last night on that, that is this one ballot language or two for that purpose alone? So we didn't really resolve that on our council meeting, but as we move forward, if it's a join and tax single question or two separate questions, and that may be one of the benefits of asking one single question, because then we don't have that challenge, but we do need to have some kind of a plan because we don't know where we're going to land yet.
Michael, this would be a question for attorneys. I've always been schooled in the thought that like there's this single question rule in terms of elections. And so you can have formation, but then separately and Dan's on this line, or Kaplan and others, but I've always been trained that like you have to have two separate questions. You can't coincide the two, but maybe you can for an RTA. I always think it's a Tabor issue, but Maybe, yeah, Kristen, I was gonna say, maybe you can answer that
Yeah,
question.
you definitely can combine them.
You can.
Yeah, Matthew, that single subject rule doesn't apply to municipal ballot questions.
Okay. Great.
Well, and there's just, I agree with you, Dan, and there's also a authorization in the RTA statute to combine the question, because I think the idea is that you've got to fund the system. So, yeah,
Amazing.
good question, Matthew.
I love that response.
Is there some consensus then, just to put this issue away, that we're going to deal with that issue by having a combined question?
Yeah, we're leaning that way. I'm open. I mean, you guys are the consultants, Bill. If you guys and we draft this up, and it's gonna, once we do some polling and determine that that would be the best way to go forward, I'm all about it. We want to get this over the finish line. So one question that's all included has got my vote.
I mean, I don't think it's something that has to get resolved today to be able to present the IGAs to your local governments. It can be flagged for further conversation, is my opinion.
Good call.
Holly, just not related to the question, but a clarifying thing when you said, we've landed on if the entity approves the RTA, but doesn't approve the funding, which if we have one question, then this will be irrelevant.
That's off the board, right?
It's off the board. Okay, never mind. That's why one question's amazing.
Okay. Yes.
I would suggest we do leave that open for now. So much of that is strategy, given that the legal will allow us to go either 2 ballot measures or 1, but the strategy and the polling might tell you which approach you take. So I would leave that open for now.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I think we can go to the, you'll see a change in A, which was really just to take out the reference to any particular percentage. That was a carryover. And I think we can go to the next change, Bill. This made clear that we might have donations as well as grants. Really kind of honestly an oversight in the original drafting, but it also came out of some of our discussions about what different sources of funding might be outside of tax revenues. Again, this is clarification. All of these revisions are about clarification that the authority is only intending to assume the regional services from SST. So it just pairs out references to anything other than just the regional service. Similar here, again, the authority isn't taking over the SST. It'll just, we'll just develop a plan for how to take over the buses and whatever other infrastructure or equipment is necessary for the authority to run the service regionally.
Thank you.
The change to 902 is actually in response to a question Dan raised about who would vote to withdraw. And this allows members to withdraw from the authority only if the electors of that member agree to withdraw. So in other words, we wouldn't leave the discretion with the directors.
In other words, we can't kick them out. They have to agree to it.
Right, right. And they can't just decide not to participate without having a vote of their own electors.
Got it.
We are right at 11:30. Polly, are there other, I don't see any other major changes in this.
Nope, that's it.
Signature
Awesome.
pages. That's all that's left.
Hang on as long as you can. Matthew, go ahead.
It's a technical question about funding not with the IGA, so I can wait for people to hop off. It's a legal question. but
Okay.
I can wait.
Although if, it might be good for others to hear the answer also.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask a technical question. Can an RTA operate as an enterprise under Tabor?
Yes,
I think the answer is yes. I mean, you'd have to meet the requirements to be
No, I understand.
enterprise and not
Yeah.
have.
I understand.
Yeah.
Less than 10% of revenue from, grants and such, and, I get all of that, but, and is that contemplated? Does it have to be contemplated in this IGA? Is maybe the question I want to ask.
I don't think it has to be contemplated. I don't know. Kirsten, do you have a different view?
we can think about it. After post-formation, you could transition to an enterprise model.
As long as there's no restriction
clear.
on that, Kristen, as long as there's no restriction on like being able to transition
Right.
without it having to be in the IGA and
Right.
those
No.
other things, if there's no restriction on that, because I mean, the benefits are, I think, obvious. If you operate as an enterprise, if you want to pass bonds, you can pass those based on fees as revenue bonds and not go to your voters. So I think it's just it's a benefit. So that's why I was asking, as long as it doesn't require an amendment to IGA or anything else,
Yeah, I don't think there's anything here that would preclude you just narrowing your funding sources and meeting the qualifications.
yeah.
Would that affect the governance?
Go ahead, Peter.
I don't know.
Okay.
Let us nail that down. I mean, it's a good issue to raise because the governance is specified by statute.
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
Yeah. So I think that concludes, unless others have other comments or concerns with what we walked through. We found a couple of tweaks still to make, and I'll turn that together with the changes to funding sources before our next meeting, and then we'll dive into the last details we have to nail down.
Great. Michael B., are you all right if I keep a few things rolling here?
Yeah, I think we need to talk a little bit about the review, the schedule. That's a priority for coming
Yep.
up to the hearings for everybody, and you've kind of been working on that.
Yep, let me bring that up while Polly or Stephen, why don't you give an update on CDOT real quick?
Steve, do you want to do that? If I'll go ahead and do it. Steve did some work with CDOT. CDOT's teed up. They know what we're about to do. We'll provide them with a copy of the IGA. They didn't hear anything that was giving them much distress, including our work along Highway 40. So all we need to do is kind of continue keeping them in the loop, and we have some at least one more meeting scheduled with them to walk through the current IGA in a little more detail.
Similarly, or Polly, why don't you give a Moffat County update real quick too?
So Bill and I met with Moffat County a week and a half ago or a couple of weeks ago, and we posed two questions for them. We gave them a general overview of what was contemplated in the IGA, and heard no pushback or concern about what we intend to do. The one piece or specific approval we will need from them is the inclusion of the flagpole within the boundaries. We will be coming back. There was a little bit of internal feedback that everyone wanted to do, but no real direct concern. The intent is to, I think they were planning to do most of this really simply on a consent agenda, maybe have Bill there to explain and answer any questions. So they'll be doing that. Really, we're expecting very soon after we get through our approval process.
Yep. Yeah, no, there was no resistance to our requests from Moffat County. The rest of our neighboring jurisdictions likely will have no interest in Polly's preparing a letter of some kind of formal document for them to sign off. Real quick before everyone starts to depart, we are going to get these public hearings. The IGA is getting close enough to being in a position to do these public hearings and transmit the IGA to the local jurisdictions for review. I know we heard last night from Steamboat City Council that your council members are anxious to start reviewing the IGA. Here you had emailed to you a plan of dates to schedule the public hearings and a simple media plan to go around bringing attention to the public hearings and the RTA process. Just so you know, we have to do public announcements of the hearings 10 days before the first hearing. So that'll include press release, advertisements in the print newspapers, social media, and I'm working with several of you on this call to be connected with different ways to get the word out to the community. Contemplating that our first public hearing would be on March 18th with Steamboat Springs. Then March 19th with the town of Yampa would be their available date in March. March 20th, hopefully with the city of town of Hayden, sorry. And then March 25th, I would actually go to Moffat County, even though we're not required. Commissioner Villard has asked if I could come and do a briefing as part of our requests, and then do Routt County that day, and then City of Craig that evening. So that would be the first public hearing for each jurisdiction. And then we would then subsequently schedule the second ones for in late March into April. I know time's short, so I want to focus on the first dates, not the second dates. So if this looks reasonable, I would start working with clerks and managers to get these on the schedules. And obviously, we're going to need to get materials put together and over as well as part of this.
No objection from me. I'm glad have you just put a placeholder for Oak Creek in there based upon their meetings?
Why is theirs not showing?
It's down to the 27th.
Theirs is the 27th.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. I got to zoom out.
No worries. And again, I really intend to be at all these meetings with Bill. So.
Bill, we're good with the Craig meeting on the 25th at 6:30.
Great.
We'll also coordinate with you on prior to that for the publication and advertisement of that meeting.
Great. Yes, I'll be providing all materials for that.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll reach out individually to all our jurisdictions to keep this moving forward.
All right. In lieu of time, we talked about the review of schedule, so we got through that. I'm looking at the agenda. Is there anything more on the scheduling that anyone, we know that the second date's going to hit up, but we're definitely wanting to put that on there. And thank you, Bill, for coalescing all these specific dates where councils are meeting. And then now we just have to work from that.
Oh, sorry, Michael. I was going to ask a question. Polly, everyone, should we do a formation committee meeting before this IGA? Do we have things we have to tackle before that? Or can we give our formation committee members a little breathing room?
We need at least one more meeting.
Okay.
And hopefully we can wrap everything up in that last meeting.
Okay. So that needs to be no later than the second week of March then, probably, right?
It looks like that. So by March 17th, 18th, City Council is the first one for us.
Yeah.
So let's have a meeting. early next month.
I'll get to work on coordinating. Please look for an email from me, everyone, to get that rolling.
Okay. Everybody good with the meeting? You guys feel excited about this? Come on, man. You're part of the team that's making this happen, right? Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I mean, come on. Thank you, Polly and Kaplan Kirsch and Kevin. Nice to see you jump on. But no, we're gonna make this happen for our community. You guys, this is really transformational. So be glad you're on this committee.
That was a lot of stuff today, everyone. Thank you very much.
Yes. I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you guys all for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Bye now.